Cities were burning, civilians were fleeing, armies were clashing across vast regions of China. But while Europe would later dominate the headlines of global war, this conflict, massive, brutal, and deeply destructive, was already shaping the course of history. So why is the Chinese-Japanese War often called the Forgotten Front of World War II? What really happened during this conflict? And how did it influence the larger war that followed? To understand this, we need to go back even before 1937. Tensions between China and Japan had been building for decades. Japan, after rapidly modernizing in the late 19th century, began expanding its influence across Asia. It had already fought wars against China and Russia, gaining territories and increasing its power. China, on the other hand, was going through internal struggles, political instability, regional divisions, and challenges to central authority. This imbalance created friction. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, a region in northeastern China. It quickly took control and established a puppet state. International reactions were limited. There was criticism, but no major action to stop it. This set a pattern. Japan realized that expansion could continue without immediate large-scale consequences from global powers. By 1937, tensions reached a breaking point. A small clash near the Polo Bridge outside Beijing escalated rapidly. What might have remained a localized incident turned into full-scale war. Now, the conflict was no longer limited. Japanese forces launched major offensives, capturing key cities one after another. Their military was well-equipped, highly organized, and experienced in modern warfare. Chinese forces, although large in number, were less coordinated and faced internal divisions. Despite this, resistance was strong. China did not collapse quickly. Instead, it entered a long and exhausting war. One of the most devastating moments came in late 1937 with the capture of Nanjing. What followed became one of the most widely discussed atrocities of the war. Large numbers of civilians and prisoners were killed, and the city experienced widespread destruction and suffering. Events like this highlighted the human cost of the conflict, but the war didn't stop there. Japanese forces continued to push deeper into China, capturing major economic and political centers. However, controlling such a vast country proved difficult. China adapted. Instead of relying only on direct confrontation, Chinese forces used a mix of strategies: conventional battles, guerrilla warfare, and strategic retreats. The goal shifted from quick victory to long-term resistance. And this is where the war becomes even more complex. China was not united under a single leadership in the way many other countries were. There were two main forces, the Nationalists and the Communists. They had their own differences and had even fought each other before. But in the face of the Japanese invasion, they formed a temporary alliance. This uneasy cooperation allowed China to continue resisting even under extreme pressure. As the war dragged on, it became one of endurance. Cities were lost and retaken. Infrastructure was destroyed. Millions of civilians were displaced. The scale of suffering was enormous, even if it didn't receive the same global attention as events in Europe. Meanwhile, Japan faced its own challenges. While it had early success, maintaining control over large areas of China required resources, manpower, and constant military effort. The war became longer and more expensive than expected. And then the conflict expanded. In 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into World War II. This changed the nature of the war completely. Now, the Chinese-Japanese War became part of a global conflict. China officially joined the Allied powers. Support began to increase, especially from the United States. Supplies, training, and assistance started flowing into China, although delivering these resources was often difficult due to geography and ongoing fighting. The war in China continued alongside battles across the Pacific. Japanese forces were now fighting on multiple fronts. This stretched their capabilities and made it harder to maintain control everywhere. For China, the war remained intense. Even with international support, the country continued to suffer heavy losses, but it also played a crucial role, tying down a large portion of Japanese forces that might otherwise have been used elsewhere. In this way, the Chinese-Japanese front had a global impact. It influenced how resources were distributed, it affected strategic decisions, and it contributed to the overall weakening of Japan's military position. By 1945, the situation was changing rapidly. Japan was under pressure from multiple directions. The Pacific War had turned against it. Bombing campaigns intensified. And eventually, after the atomic bombings and Soviet entry into the war against Japan, the conflict came to an end. Japan surrendered. The Chinese-Japanese War was finally over after years of continuous fighting. But the end of the war did not bring immediate peace to China. The temporary alliance between nationalists and communists collapsed, leading to a civil war that would shape China's future. So when we look back at the Chinese-Japanese War, why is it often called the Forgotten Front? Part of the reason is timing. When World War II is discussed, much of the focus is on Europe, the battles, the leaders, the events that unfolded there. The Asian front, especially the early years before 1941, doesn't always receive the same attention. Another reason is complexity. The war in China was not a single, clearly defined campaign. It was long, spread across vast regions, and involved multiple forces with different goals. This makes it harder to summarize compared to more concentrated battles. But that doesn't make it any less important. In fact, it was one of the longest continuous conflicts of the 20th century. It involved millions of soldiers, it affected countless civilians, and it played a major role in shaping the outcome of World War II in Asia. It also had long-term consequences. The destruction, displacement, and political shifts that came out of the war influenced China's future path. The balance of power in Asia changed, and the memory of the conflict continues to shape regional relationships even today. So when we ask what the Chinese-Japanese War really was, the answer goes beyond just a regional conflict. It was a massive, prolonged struggle that began before the wider World War and became a key part of it. A war that tested endurance more than speed. A war where survival became strategy. And a war that reminds us that history isn't always centered in one place. Sometimes the most important stories are happening at the same time, just outside the spotlight, because while the world was watching Europe, Asia was already at war.